All right. Welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. We'll give a couple more seconds for people to chime on in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen a bit here. But if you're from wherever you're joining us, welcome. We are the Pivot, the Progressive Vietnamese American Organization. We're going to be getting started soon to give you all some of our post vice presidential debate reactions. If you're on Facebook Live, we're also in a Zoom meeting right now, a Zoom webinar. If you'd like to join us, the link is in the Facebook Live description. And what we're trying to do, what we've started, Tâm Sự with Pivot, is a way for us to invite you to join us as we collectively process and discuss the vice presidential debate, as well as other pressing issues and things that are happening in the world that impact our community, to share resources and tools for the 2020 elections, and to really try and share our stories as refugees, immigrants, and children of those refugees, immigrants, right? So we're really trying to create a space and provide a space for our Viet community members to share their perspectives on the pertinent issues of the day. And we're doing this by, with, and for Vietnamese American voters, right? For today, we are going to be joined by Nick Nguyen from the Viet Fact Check team, Han Hua, the co-chair of the Candidate Support Committee, Pivot Elections Committee Chair An Tu Bui, and Pivot President Dong Nguyen. So if you're joining us now, a little bit about Pivot before we start with our spicy post-debate reactions is that Pivot, the Progressive Vietnamese American Organization, our vision is to be a collective voice for progressive Vietnamese Americans to engage and empower Vietnamese Americans through civic engagement and leadership development, and to support policies and candidates that are aligned with our values, right? And then just a quick note, if you're joining us from wherever you are, just so I can introduce myself, my name is Phil Nguyen. I'll be MC/moderator for tonight's panel discussion conversation. Before we get really into the meat of it, just take a second to take a quick break. Grab a drink of your choice if you so choose. And if you're on the Facebook Live or in our Zoom webinar session that we're having now, take a second to introduce yourself, your name, pronouns, where you're calling from, and maybe some of the hot topics during the debate that stuck out to you, right? And in general, how are you feeling? Because sometimes I feel like we get so caught up in the work that we forget to check in on ourselves, right? I'm going to go ahead and remove the spotlight so it's not just me. Cheers to everyone who's joining us and to everyone who will be joining us. And let's get started. I'm gonna go ahead and stop the share. Hopefully everyone that's watching us now can see the gallery view. But going back to our introductions, I kind of mentioned you all first, but if you all could reintroduce yourselves, share a little bit about yourselves, what your involvement is in Pivot. We can start with that, and then we'll get into the debate. Jihan, if you could start.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hua Han Phuc in Vietnamese, but I go by Han Hua. I Americanized it because my parents did the whole double name thing. My sister is Hua Ting Phuc. I am based here on the Gulf Coast of Alabama, Daphne, Alabama. I grew up here in the area, and I've been with Pivot since 2017. I got involved with Pivot during the Doug Jones election in 2017, and then somehow ended up being co-chair with First V, and then for candidate support.
Thanks, Han. And then we've got Nick from our Viet Fact Check team, and we'll definitely be referring to you a lot throughout this conversation. Nick.
Such high standards. So, or low standards, depending on your perspective. Hi, I'm Nick Nguyen. I'm a stay-at-home dad in Palo Alto. Previously, I used to be an entrepreneur and tech executive. I spent a lot of time trying to get people to click on things. And so now I'm just trying to make up for some of the damage that Silicon Valley has done by fighting misinformation on Viet Fact Check. And so, I think I have a very similar story to lots of other people, like lots of frustrating conversations with relatives. And so for me, it's just cathartic to work. I joined Pivot because first I just wanted to help someone, and I signed up and said, like, I don't need to do anything. I just need to sign. Like, if I give enough money, I don't have to volunteer. And then they still managed to rope me in. And it's been really rewarding and cathartic to kind of really scratch that itch. And I know a lot of people feel the same way.
Hopefully, after this conversation, we'll be able to help other people scratch their itch, right, and rope them in to join Pivot and with us in the work. I know one of the people that are leading the efforts during the election, Tian Tu, if you could also introduce yourself as the chair of the elections committee.
Oh, hi. Yeah, that's a big role to say. I am just a community psychiatrist in the East Bay of California. I joined Pivot in those early days right after the 2016 election. It's been an incredible community to be part of. It's really how I survived the last few years of what has been an amazing, just unbelievable roller coaster. We can't write fiction more better or worse than this. So this is where I'm at right now. I've just been trying to fill in and rallying as many people as possible, and it's been an amazing team of 120 plus people just pitching in all their talents and skills, and it's been incredible to be part of this energetic, dedicated, wonderful community. So thank you
so much. Thank you for all the work that you do as well. And last but not least, we have one of our founder and Pivot president, An/Chu Tom, if you could introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, Tùng Nguyễn. I'll go with Hạnh thing. Nguyễn Thanh Tùng. Nguyễn Thanh is my dad's name. Tùng I was named after some famous guy in Vietnam, but I don't know who the hell it was. But you know, I'm just punch drunk right now, having watched this debate, and I don't even have to drink. But really, the main thing about Pivot is that we actually created it because we hated Trump. We couldn't take it. We started it in 2017, and right after the Muslim ban. That was like 10 days after he took office or something. So this is our denouement. This is what we're going to do. We're going to try to get rid of this guy. And this debate tonight has not changed our opinion one bit. But the most important thing about Pivot, though, is I feel like we have built a community, a place where we can fight back against bullying and lies and extreme conservatism.
Speaking of extreme conservatism, we probably have a bunch of first and second generation folks that are sharing this live stream, hopefully with their parents, who a lot of them are thinking about voting for Trump, right? So hopefully some part of this will be for us to help them see a little bit more clearly, right? To help them understand sort of the issues that the candidates are really about, and I mean, really how we get Joe Biden in office about 25 days from now, right? So just to hop straight into it, to think about your post-debate reactions, we all saw that. I would say that went a lot better than the presidential debate, first off. But maybe we could go in sort of a round robin, if y'all could go over some of your most memorable moments, maybe in the words of George Takei, your oh my moments, right? And some of maybe your most cringeworthy moments that you thought from the debate. Nick, since you're the Viet Fact Check designated person for today, we'll start with you.
Sure. Okay. Gosh, like I think I kind of have two minds. This debate was a lot more, I think, well run than the last debate, but I think that's more due to the people involved than the actual moderator. If I were to design a drinking game based on predicted talking points from both candidates, it would be exactly what we saw. No real surprises. Very clear from I think from both camps that they understand their bases, and they're trying to. You can tell that Senator Harris is trying to mobilize people that maybe didn't turn out in 2016, particularly around like sort of the BIPOC community. Pence is still doubling down on his base. I don't think he's going to grow it one bit. The things that were like kind of, you know, there are a couple mic drops, mainly from Harris, like the, you know, I'm not going to take a vaccine if only Trump says it's okay. That was amusing. I'll leave it to medical professionals on this call to talk about how valid the claims are around the warp speed vaccine plan. As a lifelong Trekkie, I'm wearing a NASA shirt right now. I was very offended because I know that all the Star Trek people right now are also doing a like Zoom call to campaign for Biden. So like clearly, you know, it's Space Forcey, but not really Star Trekky. Final thing I would say is like there are a couple missed opportunities. It's harder when you're on stage. I would say that the biggest things were Breonna Taylor. You know, when grand jury will indict anything if they're told to indict something for any reason. And so if you actually peel back that story, The grand jury was never presented with any choice other than wanton endangerment by the Republican District Attorney of Kentucky. So it's that was kind of a missed opportunity for Kamala Harris to really show that she's a prosecutor and understands the law. I liked, but like, and the tax stuff, total lie around around how much money was actually going into the average American's pockets. I think most people already know that. And continually, repeating, I think the focus on the continuing lies around sort of the handling of the pandemic was pretty effective. I mean, I don't think anyone's minds are going to be changed. I think Trump's going to do something tomorrow, and then we'll all forget about the debate. But I was engaged for an hour, and yeah, I would say that like there were a few sort of cringeworthy moments, but we saw this in 2016 when Pence like kept denying things that Trump clearly said, on the campaign, and he did the same thing around like not denying white, claiming that Trump actually did denounce white supremacy, which is not true. The one fact check that I caught on the Harris side was, it's generally well believed that Trump called COVID a hoax. He didn't. But a lot of his supporters call it a hoax, and so technically that's not true. But the effect is essentially the same. The other thing that also like rang sort of as a falsehood to me was in Wuhan, the U.S. had a consulate there. They had intelligence assets on the ground. Trump was actually getting information ahead of Beijing on how the pandemic was going. So any kind of claim that China like impeded the flow of information to the U.S. is completely false. And I wish they made that point a little more sharply. But all in all, definitely way more lies from this biased perspective on the Pence side.
Thanks, Nick. So Trump really never said that COVID was a hoax. I'm a little bit surprised to hear that, to be honest.
Yeah, everyone believes that, and I think that's one of the things that I learned it from Fact Check. I think someone told me. It's like, oh yeah. So no, it's we're all learning things. We all have to be open. I think as true progressives, we have to be willing to admit that we're wrong. I think one thing that's really interesting is that Kamala is very good at explaining when you look at Obama and the way he talks about policies like ACA. He says his biggest failure was just assuming people would sort of get what he was talking about when there are a lot of very clear talking points. Like I don't want to speak for the medical professionals' experiences, but coming from industry, it was very much like, we were hearing from insurers that like there's no future for private insurance unless there was some sort of government intervention. That's what ACA is. And so like characterizing it as a socialist plan is ridiculous to anyone that actually understands socialism.
Right. So I'll pass it on to Dutong as one of the resident physicians.
Oh, so you're going to role model the whole debate where the men go first and jumps over the women, huh?
I'm saving the best for last.
Is that what you're doing? The best for last. Sorry, the best for last. Okay, so that's actually one meta message. Okay, listen, I got 3 big meta messages, okay? The first one is, hey, an Asian black woman was on the stage, that's huge. That's huge. And she, more than hold her own, and she probably beat this guy. So that's just number one, how proud we all are. Number 2, Pence opens with a lie. They talked about, the COVID pandemic, and he starts talking about how Trump suspended all travel from China, and then Biden opposed it. And I want to do Nick's job here. That was a lie. He didn't suspend all travel from China, and Biden never said it was xenophobic and hysterical. And then the last thing is what I was just trying to say, which is that this is, it's not a good look for Pence to constantly over-talking to women the whole time. And to me, the whole debate was about him shoring up his base, but he's not converting any of the swing voters, including the key demographic of suburban women. He did not say anything nor act in a way that would actually get anyone in that demographic to change their mind, particularly they're on the fence about this.
I will also add, so you mentioned, number 1, we have an Asian black woman on stage for the first time as a vice presidential candidate. Pence opening up with a lie and then continuing to lie throughout, and then the sort of interrupting and over talking of 2 women throughout the debate, right? I thought one of the things that I saw on Twitter and some of the Facebook message groups that I'm a part of popping off mentioning that, Mamala was really coming out, right? So I'm going to pass it on to someone who's also a mother at Jiantu. If you could share with us some of your top moments, memorable moments from the debate too.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever had to use that tone with your children? I know you have with me, but
Well, I don't know about how to be a good mom particularly, but I would have to say that I really felt that Kamala was struck. It's so hard because as a woman, you have such high standards to live up to. You both have to speak well, speak truth, not seem like you're overbearing. You have to remember to smile. I mean, I consciously have to remember to smile so I can appear like less, bitchy. Just a seriously high standard. My goodness. But I would have to say she held her own. I was so proud to watch her. She had some opportunities to jump in about trade deficit. She didn't early on, but she did later on about the trade deficit with China. And I was like waiting for that. But the other thing is I can't help it. And I don't want to sound like, again, stereotyping what women have to do, but she got really into it with talking about racial inequity. Like I felt her passion and emotion there and talking about the protests, and that shone through. And that was the moment at 7:18 p.m. I marked the moment where I'm like, I'm going to vote for Kamala Harris, whatever she's running for, I'm voting for her. That was the moment I felt like I connected emotionally with her, because I felt like it all came together right then and there. And she spoke, I thought, very eloquently about an issue that was both personal and professional and social and everything. So those were some of my highlights. The other thing I tried to do, so I'm a psychiatrist, I try to put myself in other people's shoes. And one of the things that happened lately is I'm trying to learn about what Vietnamese Americans think about China and why they love Trump and how China, the anti-China speech. And I just heard time and time again how Pence was able to sneak in all that, like talking points, without anything to back it up, by the way. But about how Trump stands up to China, how about Biden just cheers on for China. He stuck it in like 5 times, again, without any supporting facts. I was just thinking, as far as talking points, you really get in there. So if I thought, gosh, if I was kind of like just typical, and again, I'm going to have to admit, I don't know enough about trade deficits, all that stuff. It's really hard for me. I look it up, I search it up, I try to understand it. I know that we don't do so well with the trade deficit since the tariffs, but how to understand it seriously. I think there's a big gap between what the talking points of the Trump campaign can do versus what we can distill down to understanding on an everyday level. So anyway, those were some of my highlights about just gut reaction right off the top of my head.
Yeah, and I think that's exactly what we're trying to do here with Thumbs It with Pivot is that we're trying to make sense of everything that just happened before us and bring it to a place where we're able to talk about it in a more conversational way and for us to be able to understand it better so we can hopefully spread it through our community, right? And I'm just going to say, I love your shirt, Phenomenally Asian. I know it's from the Phenomenal Woman website, right? And also that you're based in Alabama, which I know is not a pretty conservative state, right? So what were your initial takeaways from the debate?
So it's funny because I initially started watching the debate with some progressive friends, and then I came home to do this. So my dad has it on Fox News, is the channel that he watched the debate on. And from his point of view, he thought the moderator gave Kamala actually too much time and interrupted Pence more than interrupted Kamala. So it was very eye-opening, I guess, to watch it with somebody else and see it from their perspective. I'll go back to the trade deficit that Antu was talking about, because I actually so this is my first election back in the US. In 2016, I actually lived in Hanoi, Vietnam, and working there. And then I also had the pleasure and not so fun stuff of working at the Clinton Foundation during that time. So there's a lot of things going on. So this is actually my first election back in the US with all the drama and all the debate. for me, what stood out the most was the vaccine, where she said, I would only take it if the doctors and Dr. Fauci said it's good to go, not from the president. Also, the moderator, I really like how she phrased some of the questions. It was very hard hitting. And especially, I think I wrote down a note that said the one about the super spreader event. I like that in the Rose Garden. And then the very last question from the 8-year-old. I thought that was a very astute observation that a lot of us, even on Facebook, whether you're left or right, however it is, has really felt about just the discourse on politics and on, not on politics, but just like anything nowadays here, because it's always, I'm this or that. It's not I'm this and that. Everything is nuanced, right? It's not black or white sometimes. You think of it in black or white term because you want to simplify it, because life sometimes gets a bit crazy and it's a bit about control. So I really, really like that question and how she ended it with that. So those are my moments. Going back to Jianpu talking about China, he really snuck a lot of China stuff in. Security, safety, order, all of that. I think Kamala has a harder time, or not harder time, I think for her, she has a harder job, right? Because there's only so many talking points that the current administration can talk about and they can hammer over and over again, whereas she not only have to point out flaws in those things, but also bring up their own plan. So she just has a lot more she has to cover. I think what she should have said in response to all the China stuff was, at one point, the US was going to be part of the Trans-Pacific trade agreement, which was to combat the growing influence of China, right? I think that should have been brought up, because in Vietnam, we were really looking for it. The government was preparing for it and everything. So to lose that, you lost actually, economic things that you could do. But in bringing that up, I don't think this debate or any of the debate actually is going to convince anyone. It's all about voter turnout at this point. And if you're undecided now, you're probably going to end up maybe even voting for a third-party candidate, which we actually haven't really discussed about here. So with the trade agreements, you're either for it or you're against it because of NAFTA and like jobs being taken away. So I live on the Gulf Coast, which borders Florida, which is a swing state. So I consciously today watch one of the news channels that is very focused on the Florida voters. And there was an ad for the Trump White House about how he's going to eradicate Corona. He's going to make it so that the vaccine is being manufactured in the US, and it's going to create like 10 million jobs. That's his that's his talking point.
Thanks for that, Han. And I think, that's a really great segue. I think for the first kind of topic that I feel like is necessary for us to bring up would be, as we are the Progressive Vietnamese American organization, we're kind of in, quote unquote, an anomaly, right, in the Vietnamese American community. And so there are a lot of things that I think hit particularly deep, right, for our community. And this talk on China and being anti-China, I think is one of the things that really riles up those conservative Vietnamese American voters, right? And so far as to get folks to dress up in like American flag draped ao dai and like sing "Make America Great Again," right? Which is kind of absurd still. But we have a question in the Zoom chat, which is, do y'all think that Pence's tough on China talk will galvanize the Viet Trumpers, right? Is that going to distract them from, feeling like Trump isn't as much of the strongman personality that he's made himself out to be post-COVID diagnosis, right? I'll open it up to y'all.
Yeah, I'll start. I mean, picking on a foreign enemy is a classic failed leadership and fascist move. I'll just start out by saying that. Now, the fact that they're picking on an enemy that actually resonates with some Vietnamese American conservative, it's, I don't know that it was a deliberate move, but it seems to, a lot of non-Vietnamese Americans probably resonate with that as well. I don't think, though, this particular debate changes a lot of minds on that. I think people who are already pro-Trump because of the China issue is already going to be there. And I don't think anyone else who wasn't there is going to just get converted because that's what Pence was talking about.
Yeah, I'll go next. I was just waiting to make sure that I can be a little long-winded. But the what I think Han made a really good point around TPP, the Trans-Pacific Pact. I don't remember. Partnership, right. So we have a piece on, not to shamelessly plug, but I will shamelessly plug Vid Fact Check. We have another piece coming out, kind of explain this a little bit more. TPP was actually if you are a South Vietnamese refugee and you want Vietnam to survive against China and you don't like the communists, it was the best piece of legislation that any U.S. administration has ever created. And here's why. It elevated Vietnam as a potential preferred trade partner with the United States. And the reason why Vietnam was excited was that it was a great negotiation in the sense that Vietnam got what they wanted, which is more leverage against China in trade agreements with the U.S. And the U.S. got what they wanted, which was more promises on opening up the internet, right, and allowing for labor unions and improving like sort of standards of labor in Vietnam, because the U.S. is never going to get China to pressure China to make these human rights changes. And so if you look at the pro-Trump groups that are run, the biggest pro-Trump groups on Facebook, they run out of Vietnam. And I'll say, I won't call it a conspiracy theory, but I have a theory here, which is that the Communist Party that's in power right now in Vietnam actually, I think, really sees Trump as someone that will give them all the things they want out of TPP without any of the inconvenient like democracy stuff that the Obama administration really insisted on. And so, you know, going back and looking, we've been spending a lot of time looking at Obama's record. Like, there have been many instances where the administration has enraged China so much they've just walked out of the room. Like, it has been an administration that has been tough on China and has been a formidable adversary. I don't use the word enemy, I use the word rival, because like rivals can become enemies. But I think when you call someone an enemy, it's really hard to like look at them in their totality. But yeah, I would say like, there's a story that we can tell. We won't convert all the never Trumpers, but people that need an excuse to vote for Biden, like, look, like TPP, if you weren't in the U.S. during that election, like, you know, both Clinton and Trump like sort of threw it under the bus because once again, Vietnamese American voters, if they were informed on this issue, maybe we could rally to support it. But it just became this sort of boogeyman that like killed American jobs. There are lots of other forces at play that affect labor and that affect, you know, American jobs, and people just don't understand any of that. But yes, like I think on the China question, I think the Democrats actually have a much better story, a much better plan, a much better history of reorienting around Asia, because Obama was fundamentally a Pacific president. He came from Hawaii, understands Asia, understands sort of, and if you're in tech, you definitely see the waning influence of Europe in technology and sort of in industry overall, and growing influence of Asia. And so reorienting towards Asia was a very intelligent thing that the last Democratic president did. And I don't see Trump really getting the picture there.
What about outside of China? What about other things that y'all feel might hit particularly deep in the Vietnamese American community that you've noticed in your work? Maybe passing out to Jian too, or Han.
Oh, sorry. So before I did this call, I purposely asked my dad why he supports Trump. I asked him, does he support Trump because of who Trump is, or does he support Trump because he's a Republican? And my dad said he supports the Republican because they're anti-communist. So when we're talking about China, we're also talking about communism, right? So it's not only like the rival in manufacturing, in GDPs, and in, you know, economic, we're also talking about an idea of living under that. So for them, it's all about, you know, because he was in the Naval Academy. He never served because he was too young to, but he was like in the process of. So for him, and I guess his generations and all of that, is that trauma, I guess, from being subjected to, you know, not having that freedom, that they really, even, because I asked him, I was like, what do you think, you know, Trump has had 4 years. What do you think of his job performance? My dad's like, oh, he's just okay. But I, you know, I support him because I support the Republicans because they're anti-communism.
Yeah, and I think also on the topic of trauma, right? This intergenerational trauma. I think more now than ever, we're noticing that folks in the second generation, right, like children of these refugees, immigrants, are the ones that are trying to convince their parents not to vote for Trump, right, and not to vote conservative, and they feel that weight of understanding the sort of history that their parents come from in being taking this anti-communist stance, right? but then trying to reconcile it with sort of like all the sort of human rights violations, right, that our current president has committed. So, Jiantu, what do you think might be some of the deeper the topics that hit deep in our community that you've noticed? Because I know you're a community psychiatrist as well, right? So,
well, that's a great question, Philip. And I'm just thinking trauma in terms of, I mean, I think when we talk about being anti-communist, it's not just about the ideology, because of course Russia is as much communist as it is China. So why are we not concerned as a Vietnamese American community about the current administration's friendliness with Russia? So and I'm not enough of a historian of Vietnam, but I would think that I lived for 3 years after the fall of Saigon in 75 to 78. And as I learned about it later, it really is what happened under communism in Vietnam in those years was definitely a playbook from, I think, the Cultural Revolution of Maoist China, yeah? From the neighbors spying on neighbors to taking down all the old cultural stuff, from music to books to banning all that, to imprisoning people, to basically getting them to sign confessions. All those were basically, I think, very much Maoist communist China playbook. And I think for us, and given the colonial history of 1,000 years of domination, colonial history from China, I think maybe there's a much more gut reaction to what it means to live under totalitarianism. It's too late for me to say that word correctly. But I think that emotional reaction definitely has to do with the lived experience of what it was like, rather than any kind of ideologic, that's so abstract. So, but if we really boil it down to it, then I'm just thinking, well, I mean, how do we get people to tell those stories and talk about what it is that they really need to stand up against, and what Anh-Tung just said, it is good to project all this pain out onto one enemy that's responsible for all of it, whereas if you're examining it, it's very, very complex, from the ideology to the history to who actually is trying to implement either communism or capitalism and the mix thereof, and then who's in control. So as a community psychiatrist, I think that I definitely think a lot about the division that's happening in our community now around Trumpists who are anti-communist versus the younger ones who are supposedly being brainwashed by socialists, and then yet a lot of us really believe in helping people fundamentally and helping people at all parts, whether they're super successful or they don't need that much help, the successful ones, but the people who really need, the healthcare, the workers, the people who really need to get by as a community. So I guess I'm just trying to go, gosh, why is that? I mean, it almost feels like civil war all over again, like this division is so deep and so divisive, and it becomes super emotional. So much so that facts don't really enter into the picture. It's almost like either you're for this or that side, and then there's this divide. And I don't know how to bridge that, but I definitely feel like I want to call it out and say, why do we have this division all over again? And what does it say about our history, and how do we start to heal? It's a question for me.
I really, liked the way that Harris also pivoted away from China and the whole national security issues too. As you could tell, Pence was trying to go off on, swinging over to ISIS and all this stuff, and Harris just directly, got him on how Trump was talking about veterans and being suckers and things like that. And I think, that's sometimes for us, we focus on one element, but not the whole picture, right? So we're, one way to talk about Trump and Vietnamese and China is China is not the only thing that's going on out there. There's a lot of other stuff going on. And so why focus on the one thing that affects something that's far away when there are these other things? And I just feel like it's all sort of sound and fury with the Trump administration. It's not really anything they're doing that's anti-China. It's all a game that they're playing. And in the meantime, all the real policies happening is not for national security. It's not for our military. It's not for any of that stuff.
Hey guys, this is, I'm wondering if I can interject a little bit because we have like comments and questions from people who are watching on Facebook right now. And I just want to make sure that we acknowledge and we sort of hear them and what they have to say. So I'm just going to read off some comments. If anybody wants to react or anything like that, I don't know, raise your hand, speak up. But there's some really interesting comments going on. Lines that people, let's see here, they're old friends who are reuniting in the thread. Somebody says, people are saying Pence has pink eye, which is a COVID symptom. No. Somebody else says, the flies. They noticed the flies on Pence's head. Let's see here. Be bitchy, it's the new fashion. That's Milan Tai, State Representative Milan Tai, made that comment. Let's see here. Wien here in Seattle on Kamala Harris, more than held her own. She crushed him. Josie says, she did hold her own, but I feel she could have been a little bit more firm on some arguments. Let's see here. Dante says, listening to both debates is when I wish I could see Bernie up there. He would tear them apart. Zahn says, I agree on the China issue. I was like, the Viet Trumpers are loving this. Someone else said, that fly on Pence's head because he's full of shit.
Actually, strange voice that is telling us all the Facebook comments. I have a point that I think would be important to bring up, is that as we're talking, as much as we're talking about the conservative Viet folks, right, the ones that are like, diehard Trumpists, right, the MAGA folks, there are also a bunch of folks that would have voted for Biden, or I mean, not Biden, Bernie and Warren, right? And I know because I got an Instagram, something on my Instagram came up that was from a Settle for Biden, the Instagram page, right? So how do we speak to those folks that are feeling like they're settling for Biden, right? That they could have had someone like Bernie or Warren on policy issues.
Since my dad's watching, I wanted to make a shameless plug and kind of speak to him a little bit. And so what I would say is this, look, my dad's a retired ER doctor. And one of the things I really learned from him was that you're often in a situation where inaction doesn't work. You have to decide between two bad choices. If you really think the two choices are bad, you're rarely in a situation where both of your choices are equivalently bad. So it's your responsibility, if you're acting in your own rational self-interest or the interest of your patient, to pick the least bad choice. Now, I don't want to litigate I don't think Biden's bad, blah, blah, blah. Look, if you think Biden's bad, and you don't want to vote for Biden and you're voting for Trump, you're basically saying that Trump is better than Biden. And that's fine, that's your opinion, but at least own it, If you sit it out, then you're saying they're equivalent, that's fine. Because of the mathematics of the way votes work, votes cancel each other out until there's a difference, and then once there's a difference, once someone pulls ahead, each vote basically counts twice. And so that's why I would just say is inaction doesn't seem like a good choice here. You got to make a choice and pick the least bad one. If you don't think either of them is good, pick the one that's least bad.
I did think that Callum made a slight error, which is when they were talking about climate change, which I thought was a winning issue. She backtracked on fracking. So I was just like, so who cares if he's attacking you saying that you don't want fracking? And she has to say, well, we didn't want to do that. I think climate change is a territory where I think young people, young progressives, I think really want us to come down a little bit harder than I think what Biden and Harris are doing. I agree with Nick. The classic thing that we say is don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? So, just because we can't get the candidate that you may want It doesn't mean that there isn't a candidate there who's better than the other one. And I can't imagine a progressive young person who's supporting Bernie or Warren thinking that there's any equivalence here. There's no equivalence here. We're talking about 18th century policy versus 20th century policy, maybe not 21st century, but that's what we're talking about.
Some other comments. As a colored woman, I think Kamala had more opportunities to fight back and should have, but she didn't. And Pence, being the white man that he is, took all the opportunities he could and heard the questions the way he wanted to and answered the way he wanted to. Not surprising.
Yeah, so
Go ahead, Jihan.
oh yeah, so I actually, besides the reaction, was I thought that Kamala could have been more feisty like she was on all the other presidential debates she has when she was running as a presidential candidate. But I think, and a lot of pundits and a lot of people have written about it, it was a very fine line to walk for her as a person of color between being sassy and feisty and coming off as angry. I also didn't, because she brought up a lot of points at being Black. I feel like, and I've actually, a lot of the South Asian or Indian people that have talked to me, like whether they're, from, conferences or just like in Uber rides and stuff like that, didn't feel like she doesn't bring up her South Asianness enough versus her being, Jamaican and Black. And I see that a lot also in our media, because in, I think one of the responses, they were talking about, Black women and Latinx. And I didn't hear anything about Asian people. And we've heard this also during the Democratic presidential primaries. They would bring up like everyone's statistics, but then they don't bring up Asian. So I'm just kind of calling that out.
Yeah,
So maybe
plus
no way, right? Oh.
Can I just make a comment about the fly? I mean, since, like how can, someone did make a comment on Facebook. I didn't want it to distract, but, I thought it was really interesting that it came around the time when there was all this talk about religion and faith too. I mean, it was just like, both sides were trying to push this religion issue. And obviously Pence was appealing to his conservative Christian base, but he was talking about, pro-life and all this. And of course, Kamala was responding with, Joe Biden is Catholic. Trump is not anything. Trump only worships himself. But the thing about the fly that got me, because I'm Catholic, it's like, when God loves you, He sends you a dove to land on your head, and I just had to think that when Satan loves you, he sends you a fly. I mean, that's how I see it.
I mean, religion also came up as a pretty big point during the debate too, right? So maybe we could speak to that, because there is a huge constituency of Vietnamese American Catholics there in the United States, right? Hopefully they feel the same way that Trump or Biden or Pence, right, and the flies around him might be a sign to vote for Biden. So one of the things that I also kind of want to pivot to, right, is the sort of to highlight some of the work that we're doing towards the election 2020 and what's happening behind the scenes in Pivot, like what sorts of tools and resources that we can share with the folks that are watching with us now, or maybe watching with us later on YouTube. Maybe I'll pass it to Jihan for that one.
Oh, hold on a second. Before we go to that, can we actually hold on that? Because going still on the debate, there's a really good question and actually a response to Jiantu's analysis a few minutes ago. And Agnes said, well said, Antu, on your comment. How do we help people to really express what it is that they are actually against, which I believe is authoritarianism? I think people lack clarity and terminology and simply use terms like anti-communist and anti-China, as these terms are triggering and emotional. Just wanted to make sure that you saw that or heard that. And if anybody has any thoughts.
Thank you, Pivot Voice.
That's deep. I mean, I guess as progressive, we like to think about things in a lot of different levels, right? So I don't have any quick sound bites to come back to that. But yeah, that's been the question I've been contemplating quite a bit, because what does it really mean? I mean, what does being progressive mean anyway? I mean, it ranges from, I mean, I think ultimately it has to do with thinking that things can always be better. We don't have perfection. None of it is ever perfect. Even if we pass the best laws, we're still leaving a lot of people behind. So one of the things I think about is like the Affordable Care Act. I love it because it got 20 plus more million people insured, but we still have so many more people that we haven't reached. So we can never reach our ideal goal. So as progressive, we're constantly behind, yeah? But on the other hand, that leaves us with the sense of like, well, what does it really mean to invite everyone into the conversation? It means you, and as a community psychiatrist, I think about this a lot. I have to think about what does it mean when people think about things in a different way than I do? Like, how do I meet them where they're at? How do I get curious about why do they think that way? It's often a deep conviction often comes from a deep place of experience or lived suffering. And I think about that a lot, about what happens with our generations who've been through re-education camp and whatever untold horrors. And I think we all know my family has people on both sides of the war. So I think about that a lot. And I'm thinking, gosh, so when we come here and we say, well, we need to hold on to something because it is the hope that gets us to get through. And you hold on to it because that's how you survive. Then how do you make it more nuanced and say, I get the need for you to hold on to that to survive. But how can we understand it better by holding on to this? Trump is the only one that can fight against communism. We're undermining the security that we actually have in America, in our newly found home. How can we actually fight communism abroad when we do not have security in our very own home, when we can't even guarantee our own personal health or the health of any of our loved ones? So I think it's trying to think about it in all those levels, but that's a big headache, you know? So it's a great question. I loved that comment.
It's a good question, and we should continue, because hopefully we'll do this again. So
can I have 15 seconds? Maybe 30?
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, so you touched on so many things that, like, coming from Silicon Valley, like, we've learned a lot about the limbic system of the human brain, right? Like, we evolved to deal with immediate threats. So if, like, my buddy gets eaten by a tiger, I'm going to be scared of tigers. As a new parent, I'm exposed to all kinds of stories about, like, horrible things that happen to children, even though the statistics, my rational brain tells me that children are safer in the United States than they've ever been before. We make irrational decisions because, including clicking on things we shouldn't click on because we're afraid. We have this existential fear. And I think one thing that Republicans have done particularly well in the last 10 years is really monetize this fear, monetize this limbic system response, that we never really evolved to, like, process. Bad things happen everywhere. We didn't really evolve to process, like, all of that at the same time, and it freaks us out. And so for me, like, I think part of the reason why I'm so passionate about what I do and the work that we all do on Viet Fact Check is we learn, from, our careers in industry, that people react very badly. Like, social science will tell us this, that react very badly being directly challenged. But if you empower people with knowledge, that is the best antidote to fear, and particularly if it's coming from a friendly voice and contextualized in the right way. And so, we need to keep plugging at it. We won't get everyone, but you do it a little bit at a time. And what people need to do is they need to take that journey on their own, and you have to give them the tools to do it. You can't force them to do it because they'll resist and they will process that as an attack. And then all of a sudden you get this, like, all the responses you'd expect to get. So I still think there's hope. I think that there's, we also have this unprecedented ability as human beings now to filter out everyone that disagrees with us, which also contributes to polarization. You can, if you click on Fox News, Fox News will never click to the Washington Post or vice versa, and so you're stuck in, like, this version of the internet that really is tuned to, like, your own biases about the world. And so like, it's a big lift, but I think there's a lot we can do, because what gives me hope is that I still fundamentally believe that a lot of Vietnamese elders believe a lot of the same fundamental things we believe, and they've just been misinformed. And that if you look at like the evolution of the GOP from like this unabashedly elitist party in the 80s that was kind of boring to a bunch of like fundamentally incompatible positions that were designed to win elections, like I think there's something we can do there. We can't tell them all at once, but I think we can make a strong case to help people understand what communism is, what socialism is, and how they might want and how they might sit on that spectrum.
Passing it on to our guest panelists.
Yeah, I totally agree with the formulation that one group is about fear and one group's about hope. And I think you can sell hope. Fear will get people to scrunched up and sort of into their boxes. But progressivism is about hope and hope that everyone is treated well. I think one of the way to address issues with older Vietnamese American is actually go what Nick's talking about with kids. Can we get them to stop focusing on their own trauma and what they suffered 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, and focus on what's going on now with their children and their grandchildren. Because that's, looking back to Vietnam, looking to China, all that is all looking backwards for them. It's not looking forward. Looking forward is what kind of world they're going to live in, what kind of climate, change they're going to live in. Are they going to be, tolerated in this country when they're a minority person? What's kind of education system that's happening? That all this stuff. And so I think, one, we do want to meet them where they are and talk about the things they're concerned about. But two, we have to also flip their perspective a little bit. Play on, we care about family. Play on, we care about culture. And then turn that into working on more proximal things than something that's, 8,000 miles away.
On hope?
I think I'm going back to the questions about like, how do we help people express, that what they're feeling is not just anti-communism, it's a lot of like things like dictatorship, authoritarianism, being told what to do, and just the vocabulary of that. I think it's a tough journey, right? Like my parents, my mom and dad tried to escape Vietnam several times, and at one point they were stranded on an island. I didn't know that story until my sister and now my brother-in-law, my brother-in-law was in a class and had to interview them to get all of these information out. So I think being more open and speaking more about it now with, Thi Bri and Viet Thanh Nguyen writing all of our stories for people to read and also for our parents to read. It's really important just to normalize that it's okay to talk about this. I know that it hurts and it's painful, but if once you talk about it, it's a big release. It's cathartic, right? So then we can move on and talk about really digging deep about, what is it that they're scared about? Because like Dr. Tung said, it's about hope and fear, right? Fear will drive people to the polls and things like that, and really, contagious, but so is hope. But what the progressive or Democrat is terrible at is messaging. Before the tax cut even happened, the Republicans, because I live in Alabama, I'm represented by all old white male, already had like boards made and like really pretty messages and talking points. Democrats didn't have anything. Even when we were doing the ACA, like we didn't have a way to sell it, right? So I think if we do better at that and like good, bits of information, but then weave that in with like our stories, I think that would help.
Yeah, and I'm thinking as we are talking about on the topic of fear and hope, right? I'm thinking, and you mentioned Viet Thanh Nguyen, and he mentions that all wars are fought twice, right? The first time on the battlefield, the second time in memory, right? To kind of think about the way in which the war followed us, right, and continues to haunt us in its presence, right? Especially for the next generation, and how a lot of our work now is happening on the political battlefield and the battleground, right? And in certain key states that we're really looking to turn the tide blue, right? And Pivot is doing, I think, so much work in these critical key states to convince people that, that what we're going through right now ain't it, right? So as we kind of close on out, I want to say thumbs up with Pivot. We're going to try and make this at least a weekly conversation up until the election. We'll have different folks come on. We'll be conversating with different folks about different things, different issues, whatever is hot and spicy and happening at the moment. Tonight, we just happen to have the vice presidential debate. Whether we have one if the next presidential debate happens right on the 15th, we'll have to see, but please follow us on Facebook, the Pivot Facebook, to stay updated. For all y'all that are still with us out there, commit to action, right? We have a candidate portal. If you visit pivotnetwork.org/2020candidates, it'll show you all the candidates that Pivot endorses, and we're also matching up to $30,000 any donations that you make through that Pivot candidate portal. So please go on ahead and check that out. We also want to share with you all and encourage you all to share the pivotnetwork.org election toolkit that has so many different things that are bilingual, as well as bilingual tools and resources, right? That you want to share with your friends, that your family, throughout your network. Just get that information out, because that's really what we're going to be able to fight with on this battleground, right? And then if you're interested, join Pivot, pivotnetwork.org/join us. We have a good time. These pictures are obviously from pre-COVID times, right? And now we're spending a lot of time on Zoom and here on the Thumbstick with Pivot. And we also want to encourage you all to subscribe and share our videos with Vietnamese celebrities and luminaries. We've got a ton of people that are lined up, right? I don't know if y'all know or have seen that. Andrea Nguyen, who's a chef, right? And she has this video on Munchies that has like several million views, where she's making a banh mi and talking about colonialism in Vietnam. But she called us a scrappy group of Vietnamese folks, right? And that's essentially what we are, is that we're fighting against this dominant narrative, this mainstream. And we're really trying to fuel hope in our community and our people, right? For our Bac Ang Ơi. So please check out bit.ly/project Bac Ang Ơi for more information about that and how to subscribe and share. This Saturday on the 10th, we have an event with Thao Nguyen from Thao and the Get Down Stay Down, who is a rock star, a literal Vietnamese American rock star, right? We'll be screening and re-premiering her documentary about her mom, Nobody Dies. It's part of our Stories for Pivotal Change series. You can RSVP at bit.ly/pivotthao. And before I close on out with our call to action for you all to get that ballot to the ballots, I want to just open it up and say thank you to all of our panelists, all of our guests as a part of Thumbstick with Pivot today. Chị Hạnh, anh Nick, chị Anh Thư, chú Tùng. If y'all want to drop, have that one last sentence mic drop, just like round table, maybe we'll start with chị Hạnh, Nick, Anh Thư, chú Tùng. Any last words for the people?
Us. You're an amazing MC. Watch out, Wink Cao Kỳ Dinh. You'll get her job.
Thank you.
Thanks for pulling this together in 48 hours. It's just the typical Pivot thing. Build it and sell it at the same time.
Yeah, thank you so much for your leadership, and also a very interesting and illuminating conversation. I will finish with one line from Kamala Harris today. About half of Americans have pre-existing condition, and she says, if you have a pre-existing condition, Trump and Pence are coming for you.
Better run to the polls.
Right. And with that, wait, Nick, you have any last words? Plug Viet Fact Check one last time.
Look, yeah, Viet Fact Check. Check it out. It's great. Let us know what you like, what you don't like. And thanks a lot for letting me talk at you for a bit.
Great. Thank you all so much. We're going to go ahead and segue out with this incredible video from Thao Nguyen. Oh, also Tinh Lân, right? What as Viet people, what do we know better than to Tinh Lân, right? Thank you all for joining us today, and hopefully you enjoyed this Get Out the Vote message from the wonderful Thao Nguyen from Thao and the Get Down Stay Down.
Xin chào quý vị. Welcome, friends. We have a wonderful show for you tonight. But first, a fabulous reminder from the Queen of Voting, Nữ Hoàng Bỏ Phiếu, that you have the chance to change the future.
Thanks, everyone, and good night.
Night.
Good night. Thank you so much.